Religious threats, vows of more attacks on Christians in the Middle East as Jewish centers face danger here in the United States.
And it's the first day on the job for H.R. McMaster, President Trump's new national security advisor, and he's kicking things off with a meeting here at the White House. I'm Wyatt Goolsby. I'll have the details just ahead.
Justice for migrants.
Flussi migratori contemporanei.
Pope Francis proclaims an urgent need to help refugees. Leather manuscripts and magic scrolls will take you inside one of the largest collections of Ethiopian Christian texts in the United States. On EWTN News Nightly for Tuesday, February 21st, 2017. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you to those of you joining us from around the world for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Lauren Ashburn. The Department of Homeland Security releases new guidelines for law enforcement to implement President Trump's executive orders. The memos state that any illegal immigrant who has been charged or convicted of a crime will now be a priority for deportation.
The last administration had so many carve-outs for who could be and who couldn't be adjudicated that it made it very difficult for the customs and enforcement people to do their job and enforce the laws of this country.
White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer says the memos do not change U.S. immigration laws. They just make it clear that criminals should be the first to go. President Donald Trump welcomes his new national security advisor to the White House for the first time. Lieutenant General H.R. McMaster joins the president as he huddles with his top security personnel. Correspondent Wyatt Goolsby joins us from the White House with more. Wyatt.
Lauren, the President and Lieutenant General H.R. McMaster are meeting with the entire National Security Council this evening, not just to introduce the new advisor, but to figure out how to tackle some of the biggest threats facing the country. And President Trump seems certain he's got the right guy for the job.
I look forward to joining the national security team and doing everything I can to advance and protect the interests of the American people. Thank you very much, sir.
One day after being introduced as the National Security Advisor, Lieutenant General H.R. McMaster is hitting the ground running, returning from Florida with President Trump to sit in on this morning's intelligence briefing at the White House.
He is highly respected by everybody in the military, and we're very honored to have him.
McMaster is a decorated Army soldier, a veteran of the First Gulf War, Iraq, and Afghanistan. He's also a widely respected military strategist who holds a Ph.D. in military history.
I think it's a fantastic selection by the president.
Retired Air Force Lieutenant General Mike Mueller tells us McMaster is a great choice. He says there's one key trait that stands out.
He sees problems differently than what I would consider the traditional military leader, and as he looks through that different lens, he has the unique ability to articulate how the solutions to those challenges in a way that that everyone understands. His guidance is very clear.
McMaster's appointment comes 1 week after General Michael Flynn was forced to resign for misleading the vice president about phone calls with a Russian ambassador before taking office. President Trump's first choice to replace Flynn, retired Vice Admiral Bob Harward, turned down the job, citing family reasons. What remains to be seen is how McMaster will work with Steve Bannon, the president's controversial chief strategist who sits on the National Security Council. White House officials say McMaster will have the final say over that council, and so far there's been no controversy between the two. Lauren?
Wyatt, we've also learned that President Trump's appointment is getting a response from Russia. What are they saying?
Well, Lauren, officially the Kremlin has refrained from commenting. They'd like to say they stay out of the other nation's internal affairs, but one Russian lawmaker says he expects McMaster to take a more hawkish stance towards Russia. The White House has not responded. Lauren?
Wyatt Goolsby reporting from the White House. Thank you, Wyatt. President Trump denounces recent threats against Jewish community centers around the United States, calling them evil, horrible, and painful.
This tour is a meaningful reminder of why we have to fight bigotry, intolerance, and hatred in all of its very ugly forms.
Recent incidents include a series of bomb threats against Jewish centers and vandalized headstones at a Jewish cemetery. The remarks today come as the president visited the National Museum of African American History and Culture with Dr. Ben Carson, the president's nominee for Housing Secretary. Two members of Donald Trump's cabinet travel to Mexico tomorrow for a two-day visit to discuss border security and trade. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson and Homeland Security Secretary John Kelly will meet with Mexican President Enrique Peña Nieto. The talks come amid frosty relations between the U.S. and Mexico over President Trump's border wall proposal. The new leader of the Environmental Protection Agency tells his employees Americans can support jobs and the environment without choosing one over the other. And Scott Pruitt says regulators need to help.
Regulations ought to make things regular. Regulators exist to give certainty to those that they regulate. Those that we regulate ought to know what's expected of them so that they can plan and allocate resources to comply.
Pruitt was sworn in on Friday after a bitter confirmation debate. The governor of Virginia vetoes a state bill to defund Planned Parenthood. Terry McAuliffe claims the bill would have hurt tens of thousands of Virginians who rely on the abortion provider. McAuliffe vetoed the same measure last year. Other stories our EWTN News Nightly team is covering in today's world. A group connected to ISIS releases a video vowing more attacks on Christians in Egypt. The video points to an attack in December that they killed 30 people, claiming it was just the beginning. The terror threat claims Egyptian Christians are the extremist group's favorite prey. Pope Francis demands justice for migrants, saying refugees need safe escape routes, not closed doors.
Sento di dover esprimere una particolare preoccupazione per la natura forzosa dei molti flussi migratori contemporanei.
The Pope told participants at an international forum taking place in Rome there is an urgent need for coordinated response from politicians, civil society, and the Church. He said the world could no longer sustain economic inequality that destroys the planet and forces people to leave their homes. Vatican correspondent Mary Shovlin joins us from Rome. Mary, it's amazing how many migrants and refugees there are. What did Pope Francis say about this current crisis?
Lauren, the Holy Father said the numbers we're seeing right now are the largest, in his mind, in history. Not only the migration of individuals, but entire peoples. And he was condemning that, but he also was pointing to the reasons why these people are fleeing. So in speaking to this group gathered, he not only condemned the fact that so many people are on the move, but he said, remember that they are fleeing war, persecution, inhumane living conditions, poverty, and in some cases, climate change and natural disasters. He pointed out that sometimes this migration is more often than not forced migration.
He also says it needs urgent attention and solutions. Does he offer ideas?
One of the ideas that Pope Francis pointed to, it's something that's working here already in Italy. He's calling for what are called humanitarian corridors. That is something through private agencies working together with the local government, and oftentimes they airlift these migrants and refugees in a very legal, protected way and fly them into the host country. This is something we have going on here. So we'll have Syrian refugees, but they come to us through Greece or through Lebanon, a safe place where they've escaped to, and they're able to get here legally and be protected. This keeps them from falling into the hands of human traffickers and risking a perilous journey at sea that Pope Francis has often pointed to as a graveyard. So it's a safe way to get these migrants to another safe country, safe haven.
What is his message to people who are exploiting these migrants and the poor?
He devoted part of his speech today to just that. He said it is inexcusable. He demanded justice for people who are exploiting the poor, exploiting migrants, looking for a better life, taking advantage of that for some sort of economical gain. He also decried the fact that half of the world's resources belong to just a handful of people. So again, that's a message he's reiterated throughout the 4 years of his pontificate. So more equitable economic growth for everyone, equitable justice and equal living and better living conditions for the poor. So he took a moment to point that out as well. And he spoke against this sort of hostility that they can face as they go to try to start these new lives, these closed doors that they'll find in their faces. So he's asking for open minds and open doors for people in these devastating situations.
Mary Shovlin, EWTN News Nightly Vatican correspondent, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Lauren.
Joining us now is Father Michael Czerny, the Vatican Undersecretary for Refugees and Migrants. You're usually in Rome. We're delighted to have you here. Thank you for joining us.
Nice to be here.
We just heard that the Pope said there needs to be open minds and open doors. What does that mean?
It means that our first concern has to be the people themselves. And our hearts have to be open so that we appreciate what they're going through, that we realize that if we were in the same situation, we would do exactly the same thing. And then the doors have to be open because they need some place to live, some place to raise their families.
The Pope has created a new Vatican office. You've been in charge for about 5 weeks, and it's called the Section for Refugees and Migrants. Will you be seeking these humanitarian corridors that the Pope mentioned today for people to come in?
Humanitarian corridors is one important solution that would make it safer and more secure for people to move when they have to move and make them less vulnerable to traffickers.
The Pope has also said, and we can put it up here, I think that in theory no one should close their heart to a refugee, but those who govern must also exercise prudence. They should be very open to receiving them, but they should also calculate how they will be able to settle them. I think there needs to be, what he's saying, a balance on Catholic social teaching between people having the right to migrate and people having a right to regulate borders.
Well, but that's not the important thing. The balance is a bit of an abstraction. What is really the thing is that when people move, when people come to a new place, they really need to be integrated. It's not just enough for people to come in and then have to fend for themselves. And once a country has integrated as many people as it can, then it needs to help look for other solutions. But the question is, how many people can we integrate? And that's not a big policy question. That is a question community by community, parish by parish. We can welcome people, we can make a little more room at the table, and we'll see that, in fact, it's not such a huge problem as it looks when you quote the big numbers.
You've said that the global refugee crisis isn't global and it isn't a crisis. What do you mean by that?
Well, it's not a crisis because human beings, we've been moving ever since we became human. This is a very important, it's just part of our genetic makeup that we do move. And so moving is not so terribly unusual. And
well, in war, I mean, I think these refugees are moving because they have to.
Well, there are many reasons for moving. And again, if you put yourself in their shoes, you'd say, if in the face of religious persecution, in the face of drought, in the face of terrible storms, in the face of chronic unemployment, you would move too. You wouldn't stay and just wait to die. So it's normal. It's not a crisis. And it's not global because it's each family is facing these issues, and we'll understand it best when we see it from a family's point of view, not when we try to think of 5 million or 50 million people.
Right, but we don't see that in the United States. We're not trying to go anywhere. We're not trying to be refugees. And so how do you make that match? How do you try to we are seeing others in the world, not ourselves, and how do you welcome with these open hearts and open doors?
Well, first, one thing is to remember that maybe I wasn't a refugee, but my parents or grandparents were. So many people in the United States today have stories which are very similar to the stories of the people who are coming now. That would be one thing. And the other is, again, if you think of it less as a huge policy issue and more as a question of what could our family do to welcome another family? And then you suddenly see, well, we've got all this stuff, we've got all this space, we've got all this food, and we find that when people are actually facing the reality of a particular family, then it's not a crisis and it's not global. It's just human.
Father Michael Czerny, Vatican Undersecretary for Refugees and Migrants. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for the welcome.
Coming up, overcoming temptation. Pope Francis admits ambition affects the church. And bye-bye Bao Bao, a young panda packs up to move to China. The one who wants to be first must be last, and the servant of all. That was the Pope's message today during Mass.
Tanta vergogna quando ci troviamo in quella situazione.
The Holy Father warns we will all be tempted with ambition, even priests and bishops, who sometimes try to climb the ladder and seek more influence. The nation's bishops tell U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson the government has the opportunity to overcome political divisions and respond effectively to climate change. Two leaders in the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops and the president of Catholic Relief Services signed the letter to Tillerson. You can read more by going to our partners at CatholicNewsAgency.com. Amnesty International warns political rhetoric is creating a more divided and dangerous world. Its annual report examines human rights in 159 countries. Joining us now is Lucia Sulecchia, a law professor at Catholic University. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
How is political rhetoric making the world more dangerous?
I think political rhetoric stokes fears, and it prevents us from thinking seriously and long-term about issues generally. It responds to hot-button issues and dissuades us from really finding out the facts.
So that is one way in which you are in agreement, at least with what Amnesty International is saying. The Catholic Church has been critical of Amnesty International's support of Planned Parenthood and abortion rights around the country, around the world, really. How is Amnesty International influential when it comes to these issues?
I think it's not just Amnesty International, but it's a lot of the high-profile human rights groups these days have been politicizing the question of, first, what is a human right? And I think we've seen over time an expansion of what we identify as human rights, which distracts us from that notion of what human rights are, those things that are universal and fundamental. More importantly, I think a lot of the political groups don't have the solid foundation of why do we have human rights in the first place. And the Church has begun with the position we have human rights because of the inherent dignity of the human person, and everything else flows from that.
There really isn't one size fits all when it comes to human rights. People are going to disagree on whether or not you have the right policy or the right approach, and the Catholic Church has a very long history of commitment to human rights. Are there areas where Amnesty International and the Church overlap?
I think there are two important things about the Church's involvement in human rights to keep in mind. First, when the human rights documents of the modern era came up in the aftermath of World War II, they were very heavily influenced by Catholic thinkers and Catholic social thought. And secondly, there is really no institution in the world who sees human rights problems on the ground the way the Catholic Church does. And so the Catholic Church serves migrants, people who are impoverished, people who are starving, who need basic health care. And so I think that is a knowledge both of mind and heart that the Church brings to these conversations to share with groups like the main human rights groups who lack that perspective. I think it's a wonderful opportunity for the Church to teach.
Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much, Lucia Sulecchia, law professor at Catholic University.
Thank you.
Up next, bringing different faiths together. Jews and Catholics team up for a unique display of artifacts. A priceless collection of Ethiopian manuscripts, what the magic scrolls reveal. Today we remember St. Peter Damian, a cardinal of Ostia and a doctor of the Church. He was born around the year 1000 and became a Benedictine monk when he was a young adult. In 2009, Pope Benedict XVI described him as one of the most significant figures of the 11th century. Cyberbullying, stalking, and sexting may not be the biggest online risks for young people. A new book says the greatest danger is the pressure to always appear happy. Joining us now is Donna Freitas, author of The Happiness Effect, How Social Media is Driving a Generation to Appear Perfect at Any Cost. Welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
You say young adults do not want to share vulnerabilities, their fears, or their anxiety, unhappiness. They are just concerned with posts that make them look like they're happy. Is this harmful?
What's really complicated about all of the young people in our lives who are learning, largely from us, that they need to be really careful about anything they say attached to their names online, which is true, of course. It is good advice, but part of what's happening is they're learning to post all their successes, only positive things, showing themselves as perfect and happy all the time. However, they don't feel that way all the time. And then part of what else is hard is when they go online, which is often, that's all they see from their friends.
And they have FOMO, which is fear of missing out. In your survey, you found that only 25% of college students openly shared religious views online. But you said those 25% are fascinating. Why?
Well, so the ones who do share often use social media as a way to evangelize. And so they are excited to tell other people about their faith. And some of the most interesting students I interviewed were the students who were Orthodox Jews or the students who identified as Muslim. I had one young woman who was Muslim, and she had all of her privacy settings arranged so that only the women who were her Facebook friends could see all of her pictures that showed her hair, so without her headscarf.
And that men couldn't see it, right? Because they're not allowed to. I read that.
But she really loved her hair, and she wanted to show
it off to the girls, right? One of them said that it was a playful tool for religious expression. You interviewed a student named Jennifer whose faith says she's really important to her, and she wanted to reassure you that the Lord works in mysterious ways, even if it's through Mark Zuckerberg. And she believes that social media wasn't created to glorify God, but it doesn't really matter. She says, I don't think, because God can use anything. Does social media help glorify God?
Well, that particular young woman, she actually said God uses Facebook. And I remember thinking that's kind of an amazing statement. And I mean, there were differing opinions about this. There were students who really felt like, you know, God would use anything. And so of course, you know, God would use Facebook as a means to reach people, as a means to communicate, or communicate through Facebook's users or the users of social media. But there were other students who also felt like social media really gets in the way of your relationship with God because it's like a false idol.
That's so true. Donna Freitas, this is a fascinating book, The Happiness Effect, with all of these smiley emojis, and then this one little tiny one that's crying in the bottom. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me.
The Vatican Museums and Rome's ancient Jewish community team up to host their first ever joint exhibit. At the heart of it, the menorah, the seven-armed candle holder depicted in Jewish and Catholic art. 10 works of art will be displayed at Rome's Jewish Museum. Another 120 works will be displayed at the Vatican Museums in St. Peter's Square. Church leaders say the exhibit shows the progress made in Catholic-Jewish relations.
Well, the dialogue is a great achievement of our times, and now it's time to co-work together for a better world.
And we cannot be Christians without knowledge of the religion of the Jews, because the Jews are the mother of the Christianity.
The exhibit opens to the public on May 15th and runs through July 27th. The Catholic University of America adds to its impressive collection of historic manuscripts documenting Middle Eastern Christianity. Mark Irons stepped back in time, visiting the university archives.
A collection valued at over $1 million, handmade from materials like calf, sheep, and goat hides. More than 600 Ethiopian religious manuscripts, including Gospels and homilies from saints, came to the Catholic University of America as a gift from a Chicago couple.
The university received the donation because of its long history of work in and interest in the languages, literatures, and history of the Christian Near East.
Most of the writings date back to the 18th and 19th centuries. You can find Islamic manuscripts commenting on the Quran and Ethiopian Christian liturgical books. Included in this stock of historical texts, healing scrolls.
They would be made for specific ailments, for specific people.
The scrolls contain intercessory prayers and could be worn around the neck of the person that needed healing. Curator Monica Blanchard says that all these manuscripts, though hundreds of years old, are worthy of study today.
They're part of a still living heritage. It is very important. And it is a very good way to learn about the church in Ethiopia, to learn about the Christians in Ethiopia.
The collection will be available to those on campus as well as the wider Ethiopian community. Handmade History at the Catholic University of America. Mark Irons, EWTN News Nightly.
The manuscript collection is not currently available for public view. For all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, to all of you around the world, I'm Lauren Ashburn. We leave you tonight as Bao Bao, the panda, says goodbye to the National Zoo in Washington and hello to his homeland via FedEx. The 3-year-old is returning to China to join a breeding program, and this is after he has been here at the National Zoo and beloved by many. The preparation for the trip, keepers packed Bao Bao's favorite foods, including bamboo, apples, and sweet potatoes. That does it for us. We'll see you again tomorrow. Good night, and God bless.